Hey everyone, not sure if you've seen the great debate, the Munk debates that happened not too long ago with Jordan Peterson and Stephen Fry on one side, the proponents of open dialogue, freedom of speech, individual liberty, and personal responsibility, with the collectivists, the counter narrative being promoted and espoused by Michelle Goldberg and Michael Eric Dyson. Michael Eric Dyson, that guy proved to be, holy shit, folks. If you watch the video, I'll post a link to it in the description of this video so you do get a chance to watch it in its entirety. But holy race baiter. And you know what? As soon as they pull out the race card in the manner such as this gentleman did during this debate on this kind of stage and this kind of venue, yeah, I mean, he lost it. He lost it. And apparently his support, because they usually do in these debates, there's a certain amount of support for a position going into it, and then there's a poll taken when the people are leaving the venue. And you know what? Of course, him and his ilk, this Michelle, yeah, they lost support. And for damn good reason. The arguments, the bullshit narratives that they presented, holy Christ, it was all about identity politics and groupthink and collectivist type narratives. Now, obviously, it's not just libertarians that seen this debate and come away from it with a perspective somewhat similar than my own. There's people, like I say, classical liberals, conservatives, critical thinkers, independents, anarchists even. There'd be people from a plethora of backgrounds as far as like their historical precedent, as far as what they think, what roams around their mind, the kind of ideological preferences or philosophy that they promote or espouse or hold dear in their heart, mind, and soul. And Conrad Black is obviously not someone that I would ever be conducive to as far as like, oh, we're buddies. Yeah, no, not in any way, shape, or form. I think Conrad Black is a statist. He just happens to be a statist that I happen to agree with in this particular subject, in this particular topic. And in this particular National Post article that was contributed by Conrad Black, I'm going to point out some of the similarities here. And hey, reading through the article, I'll definitely point out where the divide happens as well. Headline, Conrad Black. The forces of America's left were no match for Canadian intellect and English wit. So, I mean, obviously, just in the headline alone, I'd be like, wait a minute. The forces of America's left were no match for Canadian intellect and English wit. So basically, he's talking about Stephen Fry because he's a British guy, and obviously Jordan Peterson is Canadian, and then the two intellects or supposed experts or propagandists, as I would call them, ideologues basically, are from the U.S., like Michelle and Dyson here. But why are you starting out, Conrad? Why is the headline already a collective groupthink type of analogy? We're trying to get away from this. The whole point of Jordan Peterson saying what he got to say is we're supposed to respect each other as individuals instead of this groupthink, instead of this tribalism. But Conrad Black starts out the very article promoting and throwing red meat to the collectivists, to the tribalists, right? To those who do use identity politics as a means to an end, as a way to identify each other in our societies. Fail already, but hey, let's continue on. Jordan Peterson and Stephen Fry prove a powerful coalition at a Munk debate, overrunning the trenches of the New York and Washington left. The last Munk debate on May 18th in Toronto was on the complicated question, what you call political correctness, I call progress, thus inviting disagreement both on the meaning of the term political correctness and on its merits, whatever its meaning is. The participants upholding the view that political correctness was progress were Michael Eric Dyson, an African-American professor of sociology at Georgetown and Baptist minister, and Michelle Goldberg, a columnist for the New York Times, the Daily Beast, and Slate. Opposing them were University of Toronto professor of psychology and successor to the late Mayor Rob Ford as the most famous Canadian in the world outside Canada, Jordan Peterson, and English comedian and actor Stephen Fry. It was as much an exercise in cultural anthropology as a debate of the merits of political correctness. Professor Peterson was the only contestant who seriously attempted to address the issue. Professor Dyson delivered a vehement and rapid harangue as if to convince doubters, whose existence he seemed to imagine, that there are black Americans who know a lot of long and arcane words and can gabble them out quickly, though in his case not always coherently. He poured forth a torrent of righteous anger against slavery and segregation in the United States, which he apparently felt justified whatever structures he wished to apply to white society in the U.S. and elsewhere. Dissenters of the cultures could simply be discounted and, for good measure, excoriated. Mrs. Goldberg, a fine exemplar of the New York journalist left, invoked President Trump on 4 separate occasions. She seemed convinced the mere mention of his presence in the White House made the case that the American left, if it were politically correct in the conventional sense of one's opinions and conduct, was also literally right in its belligerence, as any level of ferocity could be justified to oppose and, if possible, remove this elected president. She didn't elaborate on what was so abominable in Trump's policies or even engage in the usual diatribe against the president's stylistic foibles, merely invoked his name as if he were Satan or at least Hitler. The fact that he was president meant the political correct had not been aggressive or watchful enough, and this gave the left carte blanche to be as abrasive and as fierce as it wished in pursuit of whatever policy goals it espoused. Neither of the Americans showed the slightest recognition that they were addressing foreign opponents before a foreign audience. Those present unfamiliar with American history would be astounded to learn that slavery was abolished in the United States in 1865, that segregation was declared and repressed as illegal in 1965, and that the previous U.S. president was African American, as are many other prominent figures in the public and private sectors of the United States. Mrs. Goldberg seemed to think that all she had to do to win the debate was say, "Trump." Presto, the argument was over. If that were the case, it would at least have spared us her disjointed and irritatingly unintelligible monologues, irrelevant to what was supposedly at issue. What followed were vintage exemplars of the intensely concentrated Canadian intellectual and the urbane and thoughtful English showman and actor. Disclosure: Jordan Peterson and Stephen Fry are both friendly acquaintances of mine. Peterson squarely addressed the subject with such precision that Dyson tried unsuccessfully to mock his gestures and portray him as a figure of the far right. Peterson explained that he considered the essence of political correctness to be the imposition, regardless of merit and aptitude, of diversity, inclusiveness, meaning demographic, ethnic, and gender balance and equity, defined as enforced equality of outcomes, in all cases regardless of merits. He had no difficulty establishing that this is fundamentally unjust and oppressive. This drove Dyson to, as was said of O.J. Simpson's trial lawyer, Johnny Cochran, play the race card and deal it off the bottom of the deck, accusing Peterson of being mad, mean, bad, and white, which the accused described as a hell of a thing to say about someone in a debate. The home audience rallied to him. It was an outrageous allegation, and I was proud of the quality of his Canadian intellect and the fair-mindedness of the Canadian audience. Peterson also slapped away racial slurs such as indifference to Native people by pointing out that he was brought up in a Native area and was an honorary tribe member, and when tauntingly asked to say where he thought the extreme right went too far, he replied, "What about Auschwitz?" Dyson and Goldberg both showed the frequently encountered American obviousness to the fact that the United States and the world are not coextensive and the same thing. The Peterson-Fry duo proved a powerful coalition of talents. After Peterson's intellectual infantry overran the trenches of the New York and Washington left, Mr. Fry overflew the battlefield and carpet-bombed the retreating enemy with witty diplomacy. He was, he said, the antithesis of what his opponents were warning against, a man of the moderate left. A man so unwaveringly gay that when he emerged from within his mother, I said to myself, I will never enter that sort of passage again. And a person who has had mental health issues, Having made himself unassailable to his opponents and almost irresistible by his good-natured, very intelligent, light touch, he made a plea for decency, civility, the avoidance of name-calling, and the collective imputation of discreditable characteristics to total strangers. It was a compelling, double-barreled response, victory in war and victory in peace. The audience was polled on the way in and then at the end, and the political correctness skeptics won initially, and their lead was stretched out somewhat at the end. Anyways, like I said, not a gigantic fan of Conrad Black. There are some areas, obviously, where I have massive amount of disagreements with the guy, but once again, even a broken clock can be right twice a day, and this is the thing. Without being a dogmatist, without being an ideologue, without being tribal in nature, I can reference someone like Conrad Black, or I can reference a far left ideologue in a subsequent video and find areas where I can agree with them. You know, if you're being morally or honestly or objectively consistent in your stance and your principles, then yeah, like I said, I don't carry any favor for a particular tribe or a particular ideology. I'm all about, individual freedoms and the pursuit of individual liberty and prosperity for everyone, regardless of skin color, regardless of race, regardless of preference in regards to religion and all. I'm a live, let live kind of guy. So I get attacked by both sides of the political aisle. Ideologues from both sides, right? They're constantly attacking me. 1 minute I could be railing against some of the bullshit political orthodoxy from those on the right, and then I'll be attacked by, their minions, and then I'll be doing the same thing for those on the left, and then I'll get attacked by their minions. Although I get a lot of solidarity and a lot of respect from those who are critical thinkers, who are individualistic, who represent the ideas that matter most, which is, hey, we're all just individuals. Let's deal with each other as individuals. Let's not paint each other. Let's not stereotype each other. Let's not denigrate each other just based on superficial aspects of whether it's our character or our biology. That's what freedom truly entails, is having that live, let live mentality and having that pretense of the non-aggression principle and private property and self-ownership and personal responsibility. If you have those as the basis, as the foundation for what you are and how you go forward as a human being, like I said, you'll be like me. You don't see things in just black and white. There's many, many shades of gray. And I don't mean that kind that's the sexual deviant types, right? Not that kind. I just mean that, it's not just black or white. It's not just one size fits all. It's not oppressor and the oppressed. Human beings are a little bit more complicated than just, binaries, right? Although binaries is definitely something that plays a huge part and definitely has ramifications for us, going forward, because, there are two genders, right? There are predominantly two hemispheres to our brain, predominantly, right? Like the creative side, the fucking analytical side. There are areas in our life that we cannot avoid that binaries do exist. But that's the thing about being a critical thinker. That's the beautiful thing. That's the beautiful aspect about being a libertarian. Is like, take the good from both sides, right? Reject the bad shit, and then you don't get stuck. Then you don't get stuck being forced in this goddamn tribal groups. These ideological or religious or cult-like collectives that look at each other as oppressors and victims and enemies, basically, and just want to constantly have warring factions, destroying not just themselves and each other, but the entire fabric of the society in which they live, in which they exist. Reject that shit. Join us, right? Let's start acknowledging each other as individuals, and that way we can hold each other to account as individuals. It's Canadian Libertarian. I love liberty.